We'd like to begin this podcast by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Whadjuk Noongar people, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Here we are again. Welcome back. Hi, I'm Matt. Welcome to Talking Couch Potatoes. Hi, Mel. How are you?
Hi, Matt. I'm good. Thank you.
That's good.
Always good on a long weekend. Or at the start of a long weekend.
It's Easter time.
Yes.
Jeebus. Welcome to Talking Couch Potatoes. We've got a great one today, Mel.
Yes, it's for the nerds.
It is for the nerd, and I'm a bit of a nerd, frankly.
I'm a nerd convert, definitely.
Are you a nerd in the closet, or?
I'm a closet nerd.
I'm out. I'm fully out.
I think with anything, you need to look at it from all perspectives.
Definitely, and this is a great perspective because we look at often the humanistic element, the heartfelt element, just the desire to protect these creatures, and we've got a guest today who looks at it from a strictly economic angle.
That's right.
Statistics, economics, viability, productivity or unproductivity, and he's got some very interesting things to say.
That's right. And you know what? If we want to be able to have conversations that lead to positive outcomes for the greyhounds, the economics of it has to come into it.
Money talks, Mel.
It does. And the people in power are all about the money.
You know what else is interesting, Mel? Countries. I've got another country update.
Is it Greenland?
We want Greenland, don't we?
We do.
Maybe someone could email in at podcast@freethehounds.com.au if you know someone from Greenland. You got a sister in Greenland. Give them a shout out. We're obsessively and somewhat oddly interested in Greenland on this podcast. No, we've got a new country. We're up to 18 and it's Bulgaria. Okay. Bulgaria. Welcome aboard, Bulgaria. We're happy to have you with us. If you know anyone in Greenland, give them a buzz. Yes.
No, but thank you to all our listeners everywhere.
Oh, it's awesome.
Globe.
It's awesome.
It's really good.
Let's do our updates and promos to begin with, Mel. The big one, the big news, the big event, the big slog is the petition.
It is the petition, the 2024 petition. We are sitting at over 3,000 names added electronically, and we have probably about the same again in handwritten signatures. So
that sounds good. Over 6,000 or so?
Yeah, it has received a lot more traction than the previous one did.
Great.
I think people are just more aware of what's going on now, which is awesome. And at the beginning of April, we have our new billboard on Albany Highway, which is really exciting. It has our petition hound Dustin on it, who's a beautiful, lovable boy. So it's definitely gaining momentum and it's heading in the right direction.
That's awesome. And if you want to know about this petition, you can actually go and listen to our last episode, episode 13. It's not just a simplistic let's stop the industry, which is a part of it for sure, but there are actually 7 quite unique aspects to the petition, and they're all super important. So check out the last episode of Talking Couch Potatoes. Also go to freethehounds.com.au for more info. And sign the bloody petition, please.
Absolutely.
What else we got, Mel? Vegan Expo's coming up, I believe.
Yes, on the 6th and 7th of April, we're going to the Vegan Festival again. It is at Wellington Square this time, and it's free entry for everybody. Everybody's welcome. You don't have to be a vegan. There'll be live music, bands, DJs. There'll be talks and workshops, food trucks, and a range of exhibitors and animal organisations. And we will be there. Free the hounds, so you can pat a houndie, you can add your name to the petition, and we'll have a chat about greyhounds, greyhound adoption. We'll have all the information there.
That's the best part. Going to a Free the Hounds event, it's patting the creatures.
Exactly.
There's always half a dozen or more gorgeous boys and girls.
That's right.
So you could go along just for that, really.
Exactly.
Couldn't you?
Absolutely, and sit around and have a chat.
So the Vegan Expo, 6th and 7th of April.
Please come along.
Come along. We did something pretty cool. Well, you did, Mel. You had a really good idea about a Facebook post. Greyhound tats. People that have greyhound tats. So
you and I got tattoos over our break.
Yes, we did. We got them in matching places.
On our ankles.
Yeah.
Or on our right hock.
On our right hock. And they're pretty cool. Yours is awesome. What was yours again, Mel?
It's the Free the Hounds logo.
So we sent out a call to see your tats, and we saw them on Facebook. We saw some incredible tattoos.
Yeah, there's some really lovely ones.
Go to Free the Hounds on Facebook to check them out. And then Mel thought, let's give them a little prize for the best tat.
That's right.
And we did.
You and Gemma picked your favourite 1 and 2.
Yep.
Jackie in
Hi, Jackie.
ACT. And the beautiful photo of her beloved Benji. Sadly, Benji went over the Rainbow Bridge last year. But, yeah, He's forever on her arm, and it was a gorgeous tattoo. And then there was another one, Dorothea, and she's from Queensland, and she had an amazing one on her back, an ode to black greyhounds.
Yeah.
2 really beautiful tattoos.
Some of them were just stunning. We're going to send them something out, aren't we, Mel?
Yep. They're going to receive something in the mail very soon.
Well done. Love your tats. Mel, there was something else that was important on Facebook. There was a post that you made that really stood out to me, and I just wondered if you could speak to that a little bit.
Oh, yeah, regarding the fact that greyhounds are continually called athletes. Yeah, so we had just a look at that regarding, it was actually Racing and Wagering that brought up the fact that these dogs are athletes on a recent podcast that they were on. And so we had a look at just in the last race year for the dogs that we could find that were euthanized or had died due to injury. And we just wondered, how would we feel as humans if several players died under a coach or a trainer? What would happen to those trainers? So,
and the list you've posted this onto the Facebook?
Yeah, we've left trainers' names off of it because it's not, that's not.
We don't want to vilify anyone.
No, we had a look at them, and one of these trainers has had 9 euthanized or had died due to injury. Another one's had 7. There's been a trainer with 4. According to the Australian standards, the role of an athletic trainer, you actually have to have a bachelor's degree or higher in that related discipline.
Yep.
So what qualifications do they have to have? And as part of their job, they are to recognise and evaluate injuries, provide first aid or emergency care, develop and carry out rehab programs for injured athletes, and plan and implement comprehensive programs to prevent injury and illness from athletics. So we can call them athletes, but if we're going to do that, hold the whole
system
industry to the same standard.
Otherwise, it's a very false comparison, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's just completing the narrative they want in order to make it more sociably acceptable. And
if they did their numbers correctly, the injury rate per athlete, isn't it more like at around 30-something%?
Yeah, they won't do it because that's why.
So if 30-odd% of your athletes were getting injured, would there be a few questions asked, wouldn't there, about the trainer,
or
the coach?
Just say it for what it is, and then let's work with that.
Talking about saying it for what it is, our next guest, Sebastian, he's going to say exactly what it is. He's done a dive into some of these numbers, and it's extraordinary, the methodology that the industry relies on via a group called IER. We're going to do a deep dive into that. You want to stay tuned because I was shocked at it's not just a slight discrepancy from reality to what's presented. And I think he mentions it's not necessarily lying, but it's a big gap, isn't it?
Yeah, yep, it is.
So stay tuned. All right, Mel, here we go. As mentioned earlier, we've got someone pretty special here today who's got some pretty special information. Sebastian Broadhurst is with us. Hi, Sebastian. How are you?
Hi, good. Thanks, Matt. How you going?
Very well, very well. Can't wait to do a deep dive into this stuff. Just for a background for everyone, Sebastian worked as an economist in a variety of roles. He is currently at the Productivity Commission. He's also done work previously for CBG, Coalition for the Protection of Greyhounds. Sebastian's with us today to do a deep dive into this incredible expose almost of some of the stats that are given to the government. Want to make sure that our listeners know that this is his own work that he's doing. Don't necessarily represent the views of the Productivity Commission, but it's awesome stuff. And Sebastian also fostered his own greyhound a few years ago. So thanks for being with us, Sebastian.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it, guys.
Is there a title for this sort of report that you've come up with, Sebastian?
It's mostly about economic misinformation that the consulting firm uses, because that's what it is. It's misinformation and completely unreliable. I think it's just important that accurate economic information is used in any government decision making. There's misinformation surrounding the supposed economic benefits of the greyhound racing industry. They're particularly egregious. So I'm sure, all of us and listeners care a lot about the welfare of greyhounds. I certainly do. I just think it's also important to realize that we also need to appeal to those that perhaps aren't as empathetic. And, outside our social bubbles, there's plenty of people that really are more interested in their hip pocket. And I know that's not nice to hear, but I think it's a really realistic view of implementing change.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, Sebastian, you hit the nail on the head there. I've spoken to several ministers, but several have said to me that it'll be about the financial situation. Phasing it out will come down to that, not to a welfare point of view, which is terribly wrong. But yeah, that's life, unfortunately.
I like the idea that we can attack it from both angles, that there is a cruelty protection angle that's really important to me. But money talks, doesn't it, Sebastian?
For better or for worse, yes, money does talk. I mean, from what I've seen in a lot of the cases, it's not profitable for these venues to run without handouts from the government. So handing out money to what is essentially a gambling industry is a huge waste of taxpayer money. Tasmania, each Tasmanian gives about $58 a year to Tas Racing. I don't think if you ask the average Tasmanian if they approve, particularly during a cost of living crisis, would they rather have the $58 in their pocket for groceries and bills, or do they want to pay people to force greyhounds to run around the track?
Right.
Doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, some of it, what you're sort of critiquing, I guess, is the statistics or information given by a group called IER. I'm not sure what the acronym stands for, but they are, I guess, a research group that provide this stuff to all states on behalf of the racing controlling bodies. Do you know much about this mob IER that comes up with these sort of this misinformation, these bogus sort of stats?
Yeah, well, it's a very flattering description describing them as a research company. It's very much a consulting firm where the industry commissions them. And of course, the reports are always going to be favorable. They read more like fluff pieces just to talk up the industry. And of course, it makes sense to make them favorable, because if they don't, the industry is not going to come back next year and ask for another one.
Right.
So these are not independent, impartial research pieces. They're just fluff pieces dressed up with a few dodgy numbers, bad methodology to make the industry seem reputable and good for the community. And that would be fine, except you have politicians on both sides who hold up these figures as if they're rigorous from a think tank and impartially created, where they're not. It's a consulting firm.
So just further on that, Sebastian, how does IER get the information? From whom do they extract the information?
Sure. So when I was looking to verify the information within the report, some of it was publicly available, but it became clear that a lot of this is not really available. So the only conclusion I can come to is that they're getting it directly from the industry.
I guess they're defending their right to exist by saying that they're contributing to the economy in some way or to the community. And these job numbers that you've really zoomed in on stood out to me. There's some real disparities there around how IER have counted the job numbers, or the industry himself have told IER to count them.
Yeah, sure. So employment data is available from the ABS. It's one of the key economic indicators that the ABS is in charge of. So it makes it bizarre when you're reading the IER report. And 2021, for example, IER claimed 10,249 full-time jobs in the WA racing industry. It's egregious. You can just look this up on the ABS and it shows 1,235 full-time workers. So that's an 8 times exaggeration.
Right.
If you keep reading the report, they bury a caveat right at the end in a tiny font saying that a lot of the participants hold more than one role in the industry. So they're counting multiple people that would do different jobs within the industry as separate people in order to get these outrageously inflated full-time job figures.
Yeah, right. And I think you gave an example there as well. There's a fellow that's a member of 6 different syndicates, for instance. So he'll be counted as six different people.
Yeah, that's right. There seems to be a preference for delivering dodgy figures and then burying caveats at the end, rather than just being straight up and honest.
And some of the figures you've mentioned, that once you actually count the actual hours worked in terms of full-time, part-time, etc., the IER's assertion that there are 10,000 jobs in this industry boils down to actually 67 full-time worker equivalents.
They use, I would call it, dodgy methodology rather than outright lying, just in order to inflate these figures.
Mel, I know that we've talked quite a bit in previous podcasts about the injury rate when they outline how many dogs get injured, rather than dividing the number of injuries into the number of dogs, for instance. They'll divide the number of injuries into the number of total starts. So if a dog's had 100 starts, that adds 100 to the numerator, I guess. So they come up with a figure of point something percent, 0.0, when the actual percentage of injuries per dog is around 30% odd.
Yeah, right. I mean, yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. By dressing it up with different sort of fancy mathematics and moving things around, they're relying on people not really looking deeper into this, and it's what allows these incorrect figures to be printed out and used. Just, unfortunately, it's being used to inform really important government decision making.
Right. And so really we need to educate people on what the real... Maybe we need some kind of podcast where we could have really well-informed people come on and, do a deep dive into this kind of thing.
It's an incredible idea.
We talked earlier about some of the attendance figures they're coming up with, basically, and they're quoting some pretty big figures. Your research indicates that these figures either don't exist or are made up, or it's a bit curious about how they even came about.
Yeah, it appears that they're made up. So I reported about 60,000 greyhound racing attendances in 2021. WAGRA, the race course administrator, who would be in charge of recording attendance, themselves said that there's no figures available for the period from 2018 onwards because they stopped counting attendances. So out of their ass, I think is pretty accurate, particularly for that figure.
I'm not sure that's a clinical research term, but it should be.
Yeah.
Mel, I don't know, would we be interested in having some kind of rebuttal to this, perhaps if there's anyone from IER or
absolutely.
Racing listening and they want to come on and clarify what the hell's going on here?
Absolutely. Well, we have asked Racing and Wagering to join us on our podcast. We haven't heard back from them as yet.
And I haven't been to a track, obviously, for a very long time, don't intend to, other than to hold a sign. But my impression is that the tracks, anecdotally, they're looking pretty abandoned at these race meets. They're not packed to the rafters, are they, Mel?
No, they're certainly not.
There's also an inflation that actually there's probably far less owners of greyhounds.
Yeah, that's right. So it appears that the figures that they IER put forward for the amount of greyhound owners has also been inflated. They appear to have duplicated across the same individual, counting them many times, which seems to be a favourite tactic of IER to inflate these figures.
Yeah, multiple counts really does seem to be a feature of this industry in general. Sebastian, also the idea of expenditure. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So yeah, if you've ever seen on the news descriptions of, the size of the Australian hospitality industry or the retail sector, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about expenditure, and it's how much individuals are spending within the industry. So I repeatedly highlight about 182 million of what they call direct expenditure in the industry as being this great economic activity that's really good for the Australian and Western Australian economy. Once you look further, though, into what actually constitutes this 182 million, it becomes clear that about 92% of it coming from wagering and racing expenditure. In other words, essentially gambling spending. So the narrative that they're putting forward that all this direct expenditure, they call it this economic activity, is beneficial for WA, ignores all the harm that gambling does to local communities and to the Australian economy. It's not beneficial to have Australians spending hundreds of millions of dollars on gambling.
Mm.
Yet IER is presenting it as this extremely beneficial activity in WA and in Australia. I think most people would agree that we'd rather have Australians spending money on good community activities, things like hospitality or retail or other community events. Pouring that money, community money, down the drain into gambling, this has the effect of sucking money out of local communities, and it's not beneficial at all.
So, sorry, Sebastian, so what you're basically saying is that with the direct expenditure, instead of it going to a supermarket and spending it on groceries and vegetables and things, that expenditure would be going back into the farming community, transport companies and all that for the chain of where that money goes to. But whereas with this money being spent on gambling, basically all it's doing is it goes straight into the pockets of the bookmakers and the people that hold these licenses.
That's 100% right. The problem with gambling expenditure is that that's essentially where the buck stops.
Right.
You spend money there and it goes to the owners, and that's really the end of it. So it's not this extremely beneficial and economic activity. It's, in fact, it can perversely have the effect of sucking money away from more beneficial community activities.
Yeah, so that goes on to your next point, which it actually diverts money away from other industries, doesn't it? Because if you're spending it on gambling, you don't have that $40, $50 to spend on something else.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's taking away from other community activities. And that's not even before you get onto the topic of the perverse community impact of gambling itself. Western Australians lose more than $1 billion in gambling every year. And what's quite disturbing is greyhound racing gamblers actually have the highest punt of any gambling activity. So anything perverse you can say about gambling activities in Western Australia, it's even more so for greyhound racing, because individuals are just spending so much money, and it's money that could certainly be used better in local communities.
And I think you call it negative spillovers, Sebastian, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff, negative impact of money going toward gambling. I guess it's not a value-added thing. It's sort of a value being dumped. And yeah, if you want to have a deep dive into this report from Sebastian, check it out on freethehounds.com.au, Mel.
Yep, we sure do. We've got that on the website.
It's a really interesting read, isn't it? I mean, sometimes economics and stats and stuff like that can seem a bit dry, but these figures just jump out and slap you in the face, don't they, Mel?
They sure do. Also, Sebastian, would you be able to just speak a little bit to what the Tasmanian Treasury came out with? Because they actually were one of the few, or the only one so far that I'm aware of, to actually speak out against this report from a government standpoint.
Sure, yes. So going back to those direct expenditure figures, so the economic size of the racing and the greyhound industry, the method that I use, this multiplier method, has been criticised by multiple research groups and government bodies as being inapplicable for the use of single industries, such as for the greyhound racing industries. And that's how I use it. So WA's Economic Regulation Authority, the Productivity Commission, and as you said, the Tasmanian Treasury has called out the method that I uses in these reports, and just said that it is not appropriate to inflate the economic data in the way that I does for the greyhound racing industry.
So, yeah, it makes you wonder, though, then how some of these ministers can continue then to push it.
Yeah, well, after reading the report and seeing how bad the methodology used is, yeah, it's really disappointing to see them used so widely by decision makers and cited in any capacity. I have had in discussions on the reports, I have had people ask me, is this even legal? Or this is so blatantly print these inaccuracies. And yeah, it's interesting because at the end of the day, incompetence isn't illegal. They tread a very fine line between producing outright lies in the report and, as I mentioned earlier, dressing up these figures in this tricky sort of bad methodology that essentially produces a plausible deniability for the consulting firm. So all the numbers are dodgy, but they're very creative in how they dress them up in order to make them appear legitimate.
These are the numbers and figures and stats that governments are listening to when they make very important decisions about whether this so-called sport continues or not. Mel, did you have some thoughts?
Yeah, well, I guess the case study about Cannington and the lease that they pay there, Wagra pay, as opposed to Bunnings, like that blew me away when I checked out the annual reports and saw the difference between the two lease figures. The Canning mayor has actually stepped up and said that he wants Cannington Track to be shut down. He's not in agreement with it, and it's literally across the road from his chambers.
Yeah, right. So the Cannington Racecourse in Perth is a really interesting and curious case study because the racecourse and Bunnings currently share a property lot in Cannington. The racecourse takes up about half of the property, and the Bunnings takes up barely a quarter. But despite this, the Bunnings lease is more than 4 times as large, about $1 million, compared to the racecourse. This is really strange to see as an economist, because generally the economic theory says that the rent prices should tend to reflect the productivity of the land. And so what this means is that similar plots of land should have similar rent prices. So in this instance, it's on the same plot of land, and the racecourse is actually a bigger share of the plot of land than the Bunnings. So the disparity in the rent prices suggests that the racecourse is not economically productive, and that additionally the racecourse secured extremely favourable lease terms. When we were looking into this, we saw that the Western Australian Greyhound Association secured this low price on a 30-year lease. So what it's done is locked out very valuable city commercial property from, if anyone's been to the area in Cannington, you'll know it's surrounded by a huge variety of commercial development, lots of retail. It's sort of a big growing area, but you have this massive plot there that has been locked in on this extremely favorable lease, as I said, for about 30 years. For the past 10, 15 years, there's been multiple government injections to keep the track running. So I'm not surprised at all to hear that it's not economically viable. There's been millions of dollars of taxpayer money poured into the greyhound racing track just to keep it going.
So they're going to spend another $3 million on it, they reckon?
On an unproductive property.
Yeah. And Racing and Wagering WA are also in the process of making a new gap kennel for 120 dogs, and that's costing taxpayers about $6.6 million because we just have nowhere for these dogs to go because we've got such a bad rehoming problem at the moment. Labor spent, I think it was $8 million on 16 homes for homeless people here in WA. And yet here there's another 6.6 million. You could get another couple of houses out of that for families and people that need it. Yet they're putting it into this industry that is just taking more and more resources from the government that could be spent elsewhere.
I guess that's a fair bit of what I took from your report, Sebastian. There's a lot more to it than that. And I really urge our listeners to check it out at freethehounds.com.au. I also urge, please, some feedback. If anything you've heard seems surprising or interesting, whatever, email us at podcast@freethehounds.com.au. Mel, did you have any other thoughts on the report and on what Sebastian's come up with?
Nope, I'm all good. Thank you, Sebastian, so much.
Yeah, that was incredible, Sebastian. Is there any final thoughts that you sort of had just around our discussion today, around greyhounds, the industry in general, that you'd sort of like to share with us?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, guys. Really appreciate it. And it's great to be able to talk about this stuff. I mean, what more is there to say? It's a dodgy industry. It's terrible for the greyhounds. As the figures show, it's not good for the community either. So what's the point on keeping it on life support through government handouts? Time for it to go.
I'm just so inspired to hear someone coming on and saying, beside the humanistic elements of why we shouldn't have this sport, here's some basic economic reasons to end this. And I really appreciate the work you've done to reveal that.
Thanks so much, Matt and Mel. And yeah, again, thanks a lot for having me on.
Beautiful. Love your work. See you, Sebastian.
Thank you so much, Sebastian.
How about that, Mel? That was fascinating for me, and I was a little worried about the dryness of statistics and reports, but actually the way that Sebastian was able to tie what he's discovered to the viability and sustainability and productivity or lack of productivity of this industry, I think was really important.
Exactly. Yep. No, it's something that we all need to try and understand a little bit better, I think, if we're going to be well-informed, successful advocates. It's definitely about looking at it from all perspectives.
Yeah.
And this is a really important one. This is what will hit home, unfortunately, more so than welfare.
Yeah, as sad as that is. We talk always about the desire to end this outdated, inhumane and unsustainable. And I think we've really focused on the unsustainability today. So thanks again, Sebastian, for that. If anyone, as always, has any feedbacks or questions, send us your queries, concerns, issues, conundrums to podcast@freethehounds.com.au. I think that wraps it up for today, Mel. Don't forget, everyone, you can find that report on freethehounds.com.au. You can find us on Spotify, on Apple. Please share with your friends, though. We've got 18 countries on board now. Welcome, Bulgaria. Once again, a secret call out, or not so secret, to Greenland. Come visit us. Because the more people we have listening, the more countries we can get on board, the more supporters we can find, the closer we will come to ending this so-called sport. And then we shall release the hounds